If you're a fan of animation, at some point you've probably questioned or worried about the place of traditional animation in modern filmmaking, and if you've had any exposure to the world of fine art, you might have wondered about the place of animated films in the critical discussion of art. And if you happen to be contemporary artist Mathias Poledna, you might have considered all these things through the place of Disney in our collective memory. Imitation of Life was Poledna's contribution to the Austrian pavilion at the 2013 Venice Biennale, probably the biggest and most important event in the art world. The film gained attention that year for using traditionally hand-drawn cell animation, techniques that are rarely seen in filmmaking, let alone practices that would be considered fine art. In fact, the very medium of animation has never really found a place in fine art at all, especially the meticulously crafted sentimental scenes created in Poledna's film. Even with animation being used in increasingly powerful and thought-provoking ways, it continues to be somewhat shut out of the art world, often overlooked due to its association with entertainment and even more so with children. So how did this film manage to sneak past the gatekeepers and enter into the hallowed ground of contemporary art? Well, it starts by using its supposed shortcomings to its advantage. Art has become increasingly disinterested with values of craft and labour, from Marcel Duchamp of urinal fame at the beginning of the 20th century to Damien Hirst of pickled shark fame at its end. But while not intending to challenge the ready-made culture of contemporary art, Poledna deliberately draws attention to the immense act of labour in the film's conception. Before they even reach the projection room, visitors are faced with a series of ink-rendered cells and watercolour backgrounds, and so are faced essentially with the illusion of animated movement. In cataloguing and exposing the dual duration of scene and labour, the artist reveals the secret, the whodunit, before we even get to experience the magic or the mystery. The presentation of these frames continues to explore the double nature of animation as one of both creation and documentation, that each drawn image is laid out in succession as if documenting the mechanical process. This distinctly visible chronology, set against an experience of a film that seems much more alive, possibly recalls what philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche criticised as the excess of history that has attacked life's plastic powers and weakened the faculty of forgetting. One of the things Nietzsche is talking about here is our tendency to rely on documentation, on reports, images, film, rather than to simply live through something or to remember it. He felt this obsession with the past would impede living in the present. So does seeing the reality of the animation process affect how we see the finished film? Well, the important word to consider here, and what makes this an interesting concept to consider against animation, is plastic. Life's plastic powers, which is a word well known to animation theorists, as the quality of plasticity formed the basis of much animation theory in the 20th century, following Sergei Eisenstein's writing on Disney, which praised the plasmatic lines of their films. This plasticity is defined by the ability of an animated character to expand, contract, collapse, or regenerate its form at any moment, free from what Eisenstein saw as the mechanized constrictions of American life. But if these plastic powers are in fact connected to life, as Nietzsche suggests, this indexing of mechanical processes depends on a forgetting of a different kind, the forgetting of life. In intentionally acknowledging the reality of mechanical movement, Poledna reduces the notion of organic movement in animation to the imitation of the film's title. But there's also another, more interesting type of imitation at work here. The film is very deliberately and obviously evoking the visual language of golden era American animation, in particular, Disney. The ambiguity already created in any animated film, that around the two definitions of animation, to give life to and to give movement to, is also an ambiguity around original and copy. The original movement of a living thing and the mechanical movement that copies it. This action of copying, of mimicry, is pushed further in Imitation of Life as its style so closely resembles that of Disney animation in the 1930s and 40s. Subsequently, the established conflict between animism and mechanism in animation is complicated further by the suggestion that, more than just being an imitation of life, it has a life of its own, the life of illusion. Because while the artist may expose the deception, the illusion of movement in animation by revealing its process, this in fact only serves to reinforce another greater illusion, that this film is a genuine Disney animation from the early 20th century. This life of illusion then relates not to movement, but to the artificial nostalgia induced by recycled and revived visual language. The film acts as both time machine and time capsule, using period tropes, techniques, and imagery to access and manipulate collective Western memory while questioning the truth of nostalgic response. It looks so much like Disney, but it's not. And the anthropomorphic characters, the idyllic woodland setting, seem so familiar, but they can't be. The film, in being entirely convincing as an animation from the 1930s, induces a sense of nostalgia that is fundamentally and powerfully artificial. What, then, are we supposed to feel after the realization that what we are feeling is somehow false? What is it that the artist wants us to think about? Well, there's a lot more context here than just the technical process of the medium. The specific time period emulated in the film is that of Disney's early Silly Symphonies with its short musical format, or even Snow White or Pinocchio in its style and characters. But this time period also recalls a society in a financial depression, a world devastated by war. This would have been a period when the Austrian pavilion, the site of the film's installation, would have been empty while Austria was under the rule of the Third Reich. Disney's feature films during these years, Pinocchio, Fantasia and Bambi, all made a loss due to being cut off from the European and Asian markets. What this all amounts to is an uncertain identity, a fracturing of something we consider to be so universal today. At the start of the film, a little bird asks, "Hello, how did you get here?" A question that doesn't necessarily serve any narrative purpose, but rather asks, how did this film get here? How did American culture get to Europe, to the Austrian pavilion? How did old classical techniques get to modern filmmaking? How did traditional animation get to contemporary art? And finally, how did nostalgia attach itself to something essentially new? Imitation of Life, being simultaneously monumental and obsolete, acts as a narrative account of the history of mainstream Western animation, the donkey consciously dressed as a sailor travelling the space between cultures, times and settings, proving the ubiquity of Disney's cartoon image today. The current place of traditional animation, of classic Disney films, in art or in filmmaking, is subsequently defined by this nostalgia. And while nostalgia itself may be an excess of history, allowing us to be consumed by the past, the false memory it creates here proves that it has certainly not weakened the faculties of forgetting. The message of the film is perhaps best summarised in the title and refrain of the song sung by the central character, "I've Got a Feeling You're Fooling," a rearrangement of a song that was popular in the 1930s. Through the song, the film admits that it itself is fooling, that it is only an illusion, an imitation of life, of Disney, and of nostalgia. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. I'm always interested in why things are or aren't considered contemporary art, and I think those lines are getting more and more blurred, so I hope you enjoyed that too. If you have any thoughts on anything in this video, I would love to hear them, so let me know in the comments, and I hope I'll see you in the next video.